This is a list of 5 players who have either won or still have issues with current Manchester City boss Pep Guardiola.
But the day after his manager spoke, in that moment Yaya is out.
Moi, si vous ne me respectez pas, je ne vous respecte pas.
My problem in Barcelona was one man, and that's the philosopher.
My friend, dear friend, Ibrahimovic.
He was my problem.
In this club, in this team, my ego is beyond that every performance of the play.
Man City allowing Joao Cancelo to move to Bayern Munich has come as a little bit of a surprise.
The rest, I didn't have problem with anybody.
He's right, he knows me perfectly. He's playing in his book, he can read another book. I'm only warming up.
And we'll start with the man whose agent infamously claimed that an African curse was responsible for the Catalans' recent Champions League failures, Yaya Toure. Our story begins at Barcelona. In 2008, as a replacement for the outgoing Frank Rijkaard, Football Club Barcelona appointed then Barcelona B coach Pep Guardiola to be their new first-team manager. There, he met 25-year-old Ivorian Yaya Toure fresh off of his first season at the club after signing from Olympiacos for a transfer fee of 9 million euros a year earlier. This summer would kickstart the greatest era in Barcelona's history, as Guardiola would immediately lead them to instant success by winning the treble in 2008-09, putting together the greatest team to have ever graced a football pitch with world-class talent scattered across every area of the pitch. Toure would see reduced game time under the reign of the Barca boss as Guardiola introduced and preferred to play young Sergio Busquets in his position. Of course, Toure's versatility meant that he could play in several positions across the pitch, and that was what he did in the 2009 Champions League final against Manchester United when he featured for the side as a centre-back. Things were not looking good for him at the club, as the Ivorian even claimed that Pep didn't even speak to him for an entire year. In the summer of 2010, Toure would sign for Premier League club Manchester City for £26 million, after which he would go on to say, "Whenever I asked him something, he always gave strange answers. He pretty much ignored me until City's offer came in. That's why I eventually opted to leave. I didn't speak to Guardiola for a year. If he had talked to me, I would have stayed at Barcelona. I did not want to go and wanted to end my career at Barcelona. However, he had no faith in me." Now, when Guardiola commented about this, he refuted Toure's narrative by claiming that the midfielder himself was actually the one who wanted to leave and that he himself personally wanted him to stay. "I talk to everyone and the doors to my office and house are always open for the players." The truth is that Toure asked to leave. We even tried to convince him to stay. Toure would go on to achieve great things at Manchester City, emerging as one of their best players as the club began their ascension to Premier League greatness. Over the course of 8 years spent at the Etihad, Toure would make over 300 appearances for Manchester City, scoring 79 goals, solidifying himself as a Manchester City legend. He was literally on top of the world at City until 2016. That year, Manchester City would make an announcement that Pep Guardiola was set to be their new manager, replacing Manuel Pellegrini at the end of the season. Of course, everyone involved knew what was coming. Pep asked the Ivorian from Manchester City's Champions League squad, and to say that this was not taken lightly is a massive understatement. The retaliation didn't come from Yaya himself, at least not yet. It instead came from his agent, Dimitri Seluk. Seluk would launch a series of rants, statements, and accusations directed towards Guardiola and the club. This was the start of a very intense feud between the pair, in which Guardiola asked Seluk to apologize to the club for his remarks or risk Yaya not playing.
But the day after his manager spoke, in that moment Yaya is out. Except Mr. Dimitri Seluk came back in the press conference, or his friends in the media, because he has not courage to call me, go to the media and say apologize to Manchester City, the first one, the second one his teammates, and after the trainer.
This prompted a massive response from Seluk, who said that if he were to do that, he must first have to apologize to Manuel Pellegrini for taking his job, as well as going off on the Catalan over his treatment of big players in his squad. Pep doesn't want players with personality. He only wants players who are scared of him and will do what he says. The first thing he did when he arrived at City was pick a fight with Yaya and Joe Hart, two of the club's biggest players. They have both been big personalities in the dressing room at City, and Guardiola doesn't like that. What do I need to apologize for? I will apologize to Guardiola if he will apologize to Pellegrini for what he did to him.
I cannot imagine my period when I was a football player, my manager go to the media, speak against Johan Cruyff and say about this, about that.
Toure would stay at the club for a further 2 years before deciding to leave at the end of the 2017-18 season, but his departure didn't come without drama though, as the Ivorian would famously say that Pep had a problem with African players. In an interview with France Football magazine, Toure would talk about how he felt he was dealing with someone who wanted to exact revenge on him, including Pep's obsession with dominating his players. Pep likes to dominate and wants to have obedient players who lick his hands. I do not like this kind of relationship. I respect my coach, but I am not his thing. Like all players, I have bickered with with my coaches, but at a certain point, men who do not understand each other reconcile. This is not possible with Pep, who is very rigid. The other players will never admit it publicly, but some have already told me that they ended up hating him because he manipulates and plays a lot with your head. As for his agent, Seljuk, he didn't stop there, as he would later attribute Pep's recent European failures to an African curse, stating, "He turned all Africans against himself. Many Africans turned away from Manchester City, and I'm sure many African shamans in the future would not allow Guardiola to win the Champions League. This will be, for Guardiola, an African curse. Life will show whether I am right or wrong." Now, these statements have been refuted by Yaya with a recently posted tweet coming from his official Twitter account, in which the midfielder condemns any stereotypical remarks made by his former agent. Yaya would state in the tweet, "My former agent is being quoted by the media about a curse. Please don't associate me with this nonsense and lazy stereotype about African curses. Media, move on please. This man does not represent me in any way. Amplifying these stereotypes is harmful." Everything Yaya said about Pep happened to be in the heat of the moment, as the Ivorian has recently expressed regrets, particularly for the interview with France Football. He said he had tried reaching out to the club to apologize, but as of right now, he hasn't yet gotten any feedback. His agent has also recently apologized about the whole issue, and he even went on to state that he is fully supporting Manchester City to win the Champions League final against Inter Milan. We know that the feud between Yaya and Guardiola happened because he was never fully a part of the Catalans' plans, but what about a player who was part of his plans and was very integral to the team before it all came crashing down? We're talking about Joao Cancelo, whose announcement to leave Manchester City to sign for Bayern Munich on loan came as a great shock to the football world. The position of left back has long been a headache for Pep ever since his arrival at Manchester City. Since then, he has had the likes of Benjamin Mendy, Aymeric Laporte and Zinchenko play in that position, two of whom were not even natural left backs to begin with. And the other one, who is actually a left back, was unavailable due to injuries and more recently due to criminal allegations. Joao Cancelo, although not initially a left back, proved to be a great solution for Pep. Signed from Juventus in 2019, Cancelo became so good that he almost revolutionized his role in the team. The Portuguese scored 9 goals and provided 22 assists in 154 appearances for Manchester City. Everything was all good until after the 2022 FIFA World Cup. After enduring a nightmarish World Cup with his country, Portugal, Cancelo's return to Manchester City saw him lose his place in the starting 11. The reason being that Guardiola was experimenting on his system by making some changes, and players like Nathan Ake and Rico Lewis were a much better fit to this new system than Joao Cancelo. He started only 3 out of 10 matches during a period in which Cancelo, unhappy about his current state at the club, and his manager were said to have had several heated discussions, which eventually led to a poor display of attitude from the former, most notably when he reacted angrily in training after finding out that he would not be making the starting 11 in the team's upcoming FA Cup clash with Arsenal.
Pep Guardiola doesn't want players in his squad who want to be elsewhere. Cancelo was a key part of the last 2 title-winning teams at City. His influence and his form has been so good that he's been named in the Premier League Team of the Year in 2021 and 2022, but recently he's seen his game time reduced.
During the later stages of his time there, the Portuguese was rumoured not to be paying attention during tactical meetings or while receiving instructions from the coaching staffs. Guardiola understandably is not one to entertain such attitude from his players, stating way back in 2017, "You cannot create something when people who are not playing regularly are creating problems. Bad faces, bad behaviour from those guys. When that happens, forget about it. You cannot stay if it happens." And this was exactly what Pep did, as during the closing period of the January transfer window, Cancelo was shipped out to Bayern Munich on loan in a deal which included a €70 million option to buy, which, as things currently stand, Bayern have no intention of acting upon. His time at Bayern has been anything but smooth sailing, as they got eliminated from the Champions League early, but the team he left were now on course to completing a historic treble, proving that Guardiola's machine, despite initial worries about his departure, is capable of running extremely smoothly without him. Cancelo himself has also expressed regrets on the way he handled the situation, but it doesn't seem like there is any way back for the Portuguese in Guardiola's team, which means he will now be forced to start searching for a new club. While Cancelo spent almost 4 years at City without any major signs of getting into Pep's black book, the next player, Samuel Eto'o, managed to achieve this in an extremely short amount of time. Eto'o played under Guardiola for just 1 season, in which they won the treble, with the Cameroonian being an integral part of that success with his 30 goals. But beneath all these glittering trophy celebrations lie a broken relationship between Eto'o and his manager. Eto'o, in an interview with beIN Sports, would talk about how Guardiola never respected him. Upon Pep's arrival in 2008, he declared that Eto'o, alongside other players like Deco and Ronaldinho, were not part of his plans, and that was when tensions began.
Et du coup, comment vous avez pris ce message quelques semaines plus tard, lorsque Guardiola qui arrive dit « Moi, Eto'o, Deco, Ronaldinho, c'est dehors.
Mais j'ai d'abord rappelé à Guardiola qu'il n'a jamais été un grand joueur. Il était un bon joueur. Et c'est vrai.
I first of all reminded Guardiola that he'd never been a great player. He was a good player, that's true. I told him. As a coach, he had proven nothing. He came in and didn't even know the story of the dressing room. Eto'o felt like Pep never respected him and everything he had done at the club. He recalled during the interview an incident in which Pep stripped him of the number 9 shirt.
Ok, nous allons changer de dossard. Oh, tout le monde dit, oh, c'est l'entraîneur qui le fait maintenant, c'est surprenant. Et il dit, Titi, tu vas prendre le numéro 9 de Samuel.
Titi Henry.
Oui, Titi Henry, tu vas prendre le numéro 9. Et Titi était bien content. Et Eto'o portera le 14. Tout le monde était surpris. Et c'était un manque de respect total et je ne pouvais pas l'admettre.
Also the time when he received a 26 million offer to play in Uzbekistan and Guardiola told him to accept it.
J'ai eu cette discussion avec lui et j'ai eu une très très belle offre pour aller jouer 6 mois en Ouzbékistan où on me payait 26 millions de dollars. Et dans son bureau avec Tiki, il me dit « Oh Samuel, ça peut te faire du bien, vas-y. » Et je lui ai dit « Celui qui va te faire gagner, c'est Eto'o. Mais tu viendras me demander pardon. »
To Eto'o, this was disrespectful. It almost seemed as if Pep was trying his hardest to get him out of the club due to what he felt was his outspoken character. Guardiola has never had the courage to say things in front of me. He passed by the players. Xavi told me that they wanted me to stay, but I had to talk to Pep. I say never. If you do not respect me, I do not respect you. Eto'o continued by talking about how himself and Pep would barely speak to one another, and the few notable times in which they spoke was when Guardiola wanted him to deliver a message to Yaya Toure, who also was not on talking terms with him, and the other was to tell him how to move like a striker. Eto'o would transfer out of Barcelona after that treble-winning campaign to Inter Milan in a swap deal which involves Zlatan Ibrahimovic moving to the opposite direction, only to go there and win yet another treble, this time with Pep's soon-to-be El Clasico rival, Jose Mourinho, a man whom the Cameroonian has since gone on to state was the manager he preferred most between the two. He referred to Mourinho as a friend and that he loved Pep as a coach, not as a person. He shook hands with me when I was at Inter. I played against Barca, but this was just for the cameras and TV. Behind the scenes, before the match, he did not greet me. Eto'o went on to gain even more success after leaving Guardiola, but the same cannot be said about Joe Hart, whose already glittering career effectively went downhill the moment he encountered Pep Guardiola. Joe Hart was Manchester City's undisputed #1 goalkeeper 6 seasons prior to Pep's arrival at the club. Around the period of Guardiola's appointment, Hart was both Manchester City's and England's #1. But the moment the Catalans set foot in Manchester, everything changed for the Englishman. Guardiola, who was announced way back in February of 2016 to be taken over as manager of the side ahead of the following season, had enough time to watch and assess that group of players to know who stays and who leaves, already seemed to have made up his mind about Joe Hart pretty early without giving him much of a chance, despite being one of the best players in the team. The goalkeeper recently went into details the 2-hour conversation he had with the former Barcelona head coach. While speaking on the Stiffs podcast, he said, "I just felt it coming. The Euros in 2016 didn't go great for me. I had a poor Euros that year. I got myself back in as soon as I could and I knew I was going to put in on his toes as to what was going on. I was in China, I flew out early, I wanted to get in the door and have this conversation. He was very knowledgeable on my background, very knowledgeable on what we did, how I played football. It was a 2-hour conversation that kind of ended with him saying, I can't see this working. I thought that might be the idea. I don't agree with you," he said. "I'll be the first person to be proved wrong, but what I see in you isn't what I want from my goalkeeper." I was like, it's all very well saying that, but I've never been asked to do the kind of things I know you like goalkeepers to do. So I think it's only fair I be given the opportunity. He said, "Of course, you'll be given the opportunity, but as soon as there are any buts at the end, you know there is a decision. It's important to first lay out the attributes of the ideal goalkeeper in Guardiola's eyes. Since the former Barcelona midfielder likes his team to play free-flowing football in which they have to keep the ball at all times and start their attacks by building up from the back, a goalkeeper with an excellent ability to retain the ball under pressure as well as great distribution qualities was needed. Pep didn't just need a goalkeeper who was very good at goalkeeping, but one who could actually play the ball as well as or even better than some of the on-field players. He wasn't prepared to settle for just a good goalkeeper, he wanted the full package. The standards were set extremely high for Hart, considering Guardiola just recently worked with Manuel Neuer at Bayern Munich, one of the best examples of the kind of goalkeeper that Guardiola likes. So the chances of Hart filling into this role perfectly was very slim, and when taking his mistakes at the Euros into consideration, you'll kind of get a clearer picture on why Guardiola didn't fancy him. In the Catalans' first game against Sunderland, he went for Willy Caballero Montero, and later when the club successfully acquired Barcelona's Claudio Bravo, Hart knew he had to leave, and so the Englishman packed his bags and moved to Italy to sign for Torino on loan. Next was another loan move to West Ham United before a permanent transfer to Burnley in 2018, and even there he still couldn't keep his place as he lost it to Nick Pope. During this period, Hart lost his place as number 1 of the England national team to Everton's goalkeeper Jordan Pickford, who remained as England's number 1 ever since. Bravo only lasted 1 season as number 1 before Pep finally got his man when City signed Brazilian goalkeeper Eto'o from Benfica, and the rest they say is history. After Burnley, Hart played at Spurs before moving out of England once again to sign for Scottish giants Celtic, where he still currently plays to this day. It doesn't seem Joe Hart harbors any resentment towards Guardiola, but the next player most certainly did, and his story is undoubtedly the wildest one of them all. We are talking about Zlatan Ibrahimovic. We all know Zlatan is not one to hold back when he's truly disgusted by someone, but he took criticizing Guardiola to a whole different level.
My problem in Barcelona was one man, and that's the philosopher. He was my problem. The rest, I didn't have problem with anybody.
The Swede was signed by Barcelona from Inter Milan in 2009 in a swap deal which involved Samuel Eto'o, and things were first going great at the club with Zlatan scoring 11 goals in his first 14 league matches, until it wasn't anymore. In a book co-written by journalist Sebastian Fest, it was revealed that Messi messaged Guardiola to indicate his unease at his place in the pecking order following Ibrahimovic signing. "I see I'm not important anymore," Messi reportedly wrote. This led to Guardiola making a decision that would ultimately stifle the Swedes' productivity. He documented this period in his autobiography, stating the following: "Joining Barcelona was a childhood dream and I was walking on the air. It started well, but then Messi started to talk. He wanted to play in the middle, not on the wing, so the system changed from 4-3-3 to 4-5-1, and I was sacrificed and no longer had the freedom on the pitch I needed to succeed." Ibra's problem wasn't with Messi becoming the central figure at all, but with how he felt Guardiola handled the entire situation. So I asked for a meeting with Guardiola for a discussion, not an argument. I said I was being used in the wrong way and they shouldn't have bought me if they wanted another type of player. I told him what a friend had said to me: "You bought a Ferrari, but drive it like a Fiat." The chat seemed to go well, but then Guardiola started to freeze me out. I would walk into a room, he would leave. He would greet everyone by saying hello, but would ignore me. As speculations from the newspapers about their relationship deteriorating began, Guardiola, when confronted about the whole situation, said he'd rather remain quiet. "If Ibra and I have only spoken twice in 6 months, there is a reason, but it's better for the club if I don't talk about it." Ibrahimovic also talked about how he found the environment stifling and thought that the Barcelona players were too scared to stand up to Guardiola. "The Barca players were like schoolboys following the coach blindly, whereas I was used to asking why. I like guys who run red lights, not pedantic and strict rules. I tried to be overly nice, didn't dare lose my temper. But after this, I stopped trying to adapt. For example, at Barcelona, players were banned from driving their sport cars to training. I thought this was ridiculous. It was certainly not the club's business what car I drive. So in April, before a match with Almeria, I drove my Ferrari Enzo to training and it caused a scene." As time went on, the relationship between the two men continued to deteriorate even further. Guardiola started his philosopher thing. I was barely listening. Like, why would I? It was advanced shit about blood, sweat and tears, that kind of stuff. And following Barcelona's semi-final exit in the Champions League to Jose Mourinho's Inter Milan in 2010, Ibrahimovic spoke of how he confronted his manager in the dressing room. "Guardiola was staring at me and I lost it. I thought, there is my enemy scratching his bald head. I yelled, 'You haven't got any ball.' And worse than that, I added, 'You can go to hell.' I completely lost it, and you might have expected Guardiola to say a few words in response, but he's a spineless coward." Guardiola has mostly managed to keep a cool head in all of this.
But off the pitch, he said some quite cruel things about you, saying that while Mourinho might light up a room, you close the curtains, and other things. What have you made of that?
Always I was clear. I spoke with him always face to face. Always.
The latest chapter of the Ibra-Guardiola rivalry happened when the Swede recently claimed that Guardiola's ego would not let Erling Haaland succeed. Is Guardiola able to improve him? That depends on the ego that Guardiola has, if he allows himself to be bigger than Haaland or not. He didn't allow me or the others to be as big. The Catalan would respond saying,
He's completely right. In this club, in this team, my ego is beyond that every performance of the place. Even I don't like when Erling scores 3 goals and the highlight is for him. I'm so jealous. Honestly, so jealous. I said afterward, please Erling, no score more goals. Otherwise, I want the Sun Daily Mail talk about me, just about me. He's right, he knows me perfectly. He can read another book perfectly.